You are no longer Luna. David's voice boomed, bouncing off the stone pillars of the pack house courtyard. I strip you of your title, your rank, and your place by my side. The silence that followed was suffocating. 300 wolves stood paralyzed, their eyes darting between their alpha and the woman standing alone in the center of the dais. Luna didn't flinch. She didn't weep. She merely looked at the man she had loved for 7 years, her gaze steady, cold, and entirely unfamiliar to him. He expected a plea, a breakdown, perhaps anger. Instead, she offered a slow, deliberate nod. As you wish, Alpha, she said, her voice carrying clearly over the night air. Then, she turned her back on him, on the pack, on everything, and began to walk away. Forever. The air in the courtyard was thick with the scent of pine and impending storm, but it was the metallic tang of fear that clung to the pack members. They parted like water before Luna as she descended the 3 shallow steps of the dais. Not a single hand reached out to her. Not a single voice offered comfort. They were too afraid of David's wrath. David watched her retreat, his jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle ticked violently in his cheek. Beside him stood Elena, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. Her scent, a cloying mix of jasmine and ambition, was a sharp contrast to Luna's natural, earthy aroma that was already fading from the dais. She's making a scene, Elena murmured, her voice a low hum meant only for him. Walking away with such defiance. Let her, David replied, though his words felt hollow, like ashes in his mouth. She knows she has nowhere else to go. She'll be back by dawn, begging for a place among the Omegas. But Luna's steps didn't falter. She didn't look back toward the pack house, a sprawling mansion of timber and stone that had been her home, her sanctuary, and her prison. She didn't look at the gardens she had meticulously cultivated, nor at the training grounds where she had spent countless hours matching David blow for blow. She walked with the grace of a queen who had just laid down a heavy, rusted crown. The truth, buried beneath layers of duty and expectation, was that she was exhausted. For years, she had balanced the pack's needs, David's volatile temper, and her own dwindling sense of self. The accusation that she had leaked pack secrets to their rivals, the Silver River Pack, was absurd. Anyone who knew her understood her loyalty was absolute. But David hadn't asked for explanations. He had found a ledger in her study, a ledger she had never seen before, and that was enough. The crunch of gravel beneath her boots was the only sound accompanying her exit. She reached the heavy iron gates that marked the boundary of the pack's inner sanctum. The 2 guards stationed there, Marcus and Silas, stood rigidly, their eyes fixed firmly on the horizon, actively avoiding her gaze. Open the gates, Luna commanded, her voice soft, but laced with an authority that David's pronouncement couldn't instantly erase. Marcus hesitated, glancing nervously toward the distant figure of the Alpha. Silas, older and wiser, simply nodded and activated the mechanism. The gates groaned, swinging inward with a sluggish heaviness that mirrored the atmosphere. As she stepped past the threshold, Luna paused. She inhaled deeply, pulling the scent of the wild, untamed forest into her lungs. It was sharper, more dangerous than the manicured grounds of the pack house. It smelled like freedom. She adjusted the small leather satchel slung over her shoulder. Packed days ago, a quiet preparation for a storm she knew was gathering, even if she hadn't anticipated the specific lightning strike that ignited it. Back on the dais, David felt a sudden, inexplicable tightening in his chest. The sight of her silhouette slipping through the iron gates sent a jolt of panic through him, sharp and cold. It was a fleeting sensation, quickly smothered by righteous anger. She had betrayed him. The ledger was proof. He had to be strong. He had to lead. "Alpha!" Silas called out, his voice echoing across the courtyard, carrying a tremor he couldn't hide. "The gates are closed." David nodded sharply, turning away from the sight of the empty archway. He addressed the silent pack. "The matter is settled. We move forward. Tomorrow, we hold the Luna ceremony for Elena." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of surprise and unease. The transition was brutally fast. Elena smiled, a triumphant curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. Luna, meanwhile, was already deep within the tree line. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting long, skeletal shadows on the forest floor. She didn't run. She maintained a steady, relentless pace, her senses heightened, tuned to the rustle of leaves and the snap of twigs. She was no longer a Luna, but she was still a wolf. And a solitary wolf was a dangerous thing indeed. The forest at night was a symphony of unseen threats and hidden life. But Luna found a strange comfort in its indifference. The trees didn't judge her. The wind didn't whisper accusations. For the first time in years, she was accountable only to herself. She walked until her legs burned, and the moon began its slow descent toward the horizon. Finding a small hollow beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient oak, she settled down. She didn't light a fire. Doing so would announce her position to anyone, or anything, that might be tracking her. Pulling a thin blanket from her satchel, she wrapped it tightly around her shoulders. The physical cold was manageable. It was the chill radiating from within that proved difficult to ignore. The image of David's face, contorted with rage and a disturbing lack of hesitation, played repeatedly in her mind. 7 years. They had built the pack's current prosperity together. She had negotiated trade agreements, mediated disputes, and stood by his side during the border skirmishes. The suddenness of his turn was what baffled her most. The ledger had appeared mysteriously, filled with transactions she supposedly authorized. It was a clumsy forgery, easily disproved with a thorough investigation. But David hadn't wanted an investigation. He had wanted an execution, metaphorically speaking. Why? The question echoed in the silent hollow. Was it simply Elena's influence? Or was there a deeper rot within David? A fragility to his ego that couldn't handle a Luna who often outshone him in diplomacy. A twig snapped nearby, sharp and loud. Luna froze, her breathing shallow. She closed her eyes, extending her senses, feeling the subtle vibrations in the earth and tasting the air for unfamiliar scents. It was a fox, moving cautiously through the underbrush. She exhaled slowly, the tension draining from her muscles. Morning brought a pale, watery light and a stiff ache in her joints. She ate a handful of dried berries and nuts from her pack, washing them down with water from a nearby stream. She needed a plan. The nearest town, a human settlement indifferent to the complexities of wolf packs, was a 3-day trek to the north. It was her best option for anonymity and a fresh start. But traveling on foot made her vulnerable. She set off, her pace steady. Around midday, she caught a scent that made her blood run cold. It wasn't a forest creature. It was a wolf, and it was familiar. She dropped to a crouch, concealing herself behind a dense thicket of ferns. The scent grew stronger, musky with a hint of damp earth. It was Jax, one of David's trackers. Had David sent him to bring her back, or to finish the job? Luna watched as Jax emerged into a small clearing about 50 yards away. He was in his human form, moving with a predatory grace, his eyes scanning the ground. He knelt, examining a patch of soft earth where she had crossed hours earlier. He knew she was here. Luna calculated her options. She could run, but Jax was faster and had the advantage of the pack's resources. She could fight, but a confrontation would likely draw more of David's men. She chose the hardest option: stillness. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate until it was barely a flutter. She willed her scent to blend with the surrounding damp vegetation, a technique she had learned from an old rogue wolf years ago. Jax lingered in the clearing for what felt like an eternity. He sniffed the air, a frown creasing his forehead. He seemed confused, pacing back and forth, losing the trail. Finally, with a frustrated sigh, he shifted into his wolf form, a massive, russet-colored beast, and bounded off in the wrong direction. Luna remained hidden for another hour, ensuring he was truly gone. When she finally stood, her legs were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. David was actively hunting her. The realization was a bitter pill. Walking away wasn't enough. She had to disappear completely. She adjusted her satchel, the strap biting into her shoulder, and adjusted her course. She wouldn't go north to the human town. That was too predictable. She would go east, toward the treacherous Blackwood Ridge. It was a path few wolves dared to tread, a place of myths and dangerous terrain. It was exactly where they wouldn't look. The terrain shifted drastically as Luna pressed east. The gentle slopes of the pine forest gave way to jagged rock formations and dense, unforgiving undergrowth. The Blackwood Ridge lived up to its name. The trees here were ancient, their bark a charred, unnatural black, their branches twisting like arthritic fingers against the bruised sky. The air was thinner, colder, and carried a metallic scent that tasted like old copper on her tongue. The legend spoke of the ridge as a cursed place, an area where the veil between the physical world and the spirit realm was thin. Pack mothers used tales of the Blackwood to frighten disobedient pups into submission. Luna didn't believe in curses, but she respected the hostile environment. Every step required focus. Loose shale threatened to send her tumbling down steep ravines, and the dense thorny bushes tore at her clothes and skin. By the second day on the ridge, her water supply was dangerously low. The streams she had relied upon earlier had vanished, replaced by dry, cracked gullies. Exhaustion gnawed at her, a physical weight dragging her down. She stopped to rest against a smooth boulder, pulling her canteen from her bag. A single swallow remained. She swished it around her mouth, savoring the cool liquid, before letting it slide down her parched throat. It wasn't enough. As she sat, the silence of the ridge pressed in on her. It was a heavy, oppressive quiet, devoid of birdsong or the rustle of small animals. It felt unnatural. Then, she heard it. A low, rhythmic thrumming, like a heartbeat vibrating through the stone beneath her. She placed her hand flat against the rock. The vibration was faint, but undeniable. It wasn't seismic activity. It felt purposeful, structured. Intrigued and desperate for a distraction from her thirst, she followed the sound. It led her deeper into a narrow, winding canyon, the sheer rock walls closing in until only a sliver of gray sky was visible above. The thrumming grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls. It was accompanied by a strange, discordant chanting, voices weaving together in a language she didn't recognize. Cautiously, she peered around a bend in the canyon. In a small, circular clearing stood 3 figures, draped in heavy, dark robes. They were gathered around a shallow pool of shimmering, silver liquid. The liquid wasn't water. It pulsed with an inner light, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the canyon walls. Luna held her breath, pressing herself against the rock face. These weren't wolves. They moved with a strange, fluid grace, their forms seemingly shifting and blurring at the edges. "The resonance is weak," one of the figures hissed, their voice like dry leaves rasping against stone. "The disruption in the valley affects the current," another replied. A bond severed abruptly. Luna's heart skipped a beat. A bond severed abruptly. They were talking about her, about the mating bond David had carelessly broken. "The Alpha is foolish," the third figure intoned. "He disrupts the balance for fleeting power. He invites ruin." Luna watched, captivated and terrified. These beings, whoever or whatever they were monitoring the pack's internal affairs. Suddenly, the surface of the silver pool violently agitated. The liquid frothed and bubbled, rising into a column that mirrored the shape of a man. It was David. The image was distorted, as if seen through a funhouse mirror. But the furious, chaotic energy radiating from the figure was unmistakably his. The projection opened its mouth in a silent scream, a display of raw, uncontrolled power that sent a shiver down Luna's spine. "The chaos spreads," the first robed figure noted, a hint of satisfaction in their voice. Luna realized with a jolt that these beings weren't just observing. They were feeding on the instability David had created. She needed to leave. Now. She took a careful step backward, her boot finding a loose stone. It clattered loudly in the oppressive silence. The chanting stopped instantly. 3 hooded heads turned as one, facing her hiding spot. The silver projection of David collapsed back into the pool with a sickening splash. "We have a listener," the raspy voice echoed through the canyon. Luna didn't hesitate. She turned and ran. Luna scrambled up the steep, jagged incline, her breath tearing through her throat in ragged gasps. She did not look back. The oppressive silence of the Blackwood Ridge had been shattered by the memory of that raspy, ancient voice, and the phantom sensation of being watched urged her muscles past the point of exhaustion. The rocks tore at her palms, leaving smears of crimson against the charcoal-colored stone. But the physical sting was nothing compared to the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The entities in the canyon, those robed figures feeding on the severed energy of her bond with David, were a threat she had never encountered in all her years studying pack lore. They were parasites of chaos, and David, in his blind rage, had served them an absolute feast. She reached the crest of the ridge as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of violet and bruised orange. Her legs finally gave out. She collapsed against the trunk of a dead, twisted pine, her chest heaving. Her water was gone. Her body was battered. The cold of the impending night was already beginning to seep through her thin clothing. Closing her eyes, Luna tried to center herself, to find the deep, quiet reservoir of strength that had always made her an exceptional Luna. But reaching inward only highlighted the devastating emptiness where her mate bond used to be. For 7 years, a warm, golden thread of connection had tethered her to David. It had been a constant hum of shared emotion, his triumphs, his anxieties, his sudden bursts of warmth. Now, there was only a frayed, aching void. It throbbed in time with her heartbeat, a phantom limb that refused to stop hurting. "I strip you of your title, your rank, and your place by my side," the words echoed in her mind, carrying the same devastating finality as they had on the dais. She remembered a night 3 years ago, during a brutal winter storm. They had been trapped in the pack house study, wrapped in heavy blankets before a roaring fire. David had pulled her close, burying his face in her neck. You are the compass of this pack, Luna, he had whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Without you, we lose our way. Without you, I lose my way. A bitter, humorless smile touched her cracked lips. How quickly the compass had been discarded the moment a forged ledger pointed toward treason. How eagerly he had replaced her with Elena, a woman whose ambition was as transparent as glass to everyone except the Alpha himself. A sudden shift in the wind pulled her from her memories. The scent of rain was heavy in the air, but beneath it lay something else. A faint, earthy aroma. Wood smoke. Survival instincts overrode her exhaustion. Smoke meant a fire, and a fire meant someone was out here in the desolate expanse of the ridge. Forcing her trembling legs to bear her weight, Luna pushed herself off the tree. She could not afford to freeze to death, but she also could not walk blindly into a camp of hostiles. Moving with deliberate, agonizing slowness, she followed the scent. The terrain sloped downward into a treacherous ravine choked with thorny underbrush. The shadows deepened into absolute blackness as the last light of day vanished. Her foot found a patch of loose shale. Before she could adjust her balance, the ground gave way beneath her. Luna fell, tumbling backward down the steep embankment. Thorny branches whipped across her face and arms as she slid, the world spinning in a chaotic blur of pain and darkness. She hit a flat plateau of rock with a sickening thud, the breath knocked completely from her lungs. For a long time, there was only the ringing in her ears and the crushing weight of the dark. As consciousness began to slip away, drawn down by the heavy tide of exhaustion and injury, she thought she heard the crunch of boots on gravel. A shadow detached itself from the gloom, stepping into her fading line of sight. "Well?" a low, calm voice murmured. "This is certainly unexpected." Then the darkness took her entirely. The pack-house study was exactly as it had always been, yet to David, it felt entirely alien. The heavy mahogany desk, the walls lined with leather-bound volumes of pack history, the vast window overlooking the training grounds. It was all perfectly ordered. But the air was incredibly thin, suffocating him in slow, agonizing increments. David sat behind the desk, staring blindly at the forged ledger that had ended his 7-year partnership. Beside him, Elena leaned against the edge of the wood, sipping a glass of dark amber liquid. Her jasmine perfume, which had once seemed intoxicating, now gave him a sharp, persistent headache. "The Omegas are complaining about the shift schedules," Elena said, her tone light, almost bored. "I told them if they can't manage the workload, we can always find lower-ranking wolves to take their place. Discipline is key right now, David. We must project strength." David rubbed his temples, a deep, restless agitation clawing at his chest. Luna spent 3 months designing that schedule so the mothers could be with their pups during the evening meal. He muttered, his voice hoarse. "Revert it." Elena's spine stiffened. "David, she is gone. You cannot keep running this pack by the ghost of her rules. I am your Luna now. You need to let me lead." He looked up at her. Really looked at her. For the first time in days. The triumph in her eyes was thinly veiled. There was no concern for the pack's morale, no understanding of the delicate balance required to keep 300 wolves united. There was only the desire for control. A cold, heavy knot formed in his stomach. Before he could respond, the heavy oak doors of the study swung open. Jax stood in the threshold. The tracker looked exhausted, his clothes muddy, his usually sharp eyes shadowed with unease. "Report," David commanded, grateful for the interruption. Jack stepped into the room, pointedly ignoring Elena. "I lost her trail on the first day. She masked her scent perfectly. But I kept sweeping the perimeter. I picked up a trace this morning, nearly 50 miles east. Elena scoffed. East? There's nothing east but the Blackwood Ridge. She's either incredibly stupid, or she's trying to make a martyr of herself. David's blood ran completely cold. The headache vanished, replaced by a sudden, rushing panic that threatened to crush his windpipe. The Blackwood Ridge. It was a death sentence. The terrain was impassable, devoid of food and water, and plagued by environmental hazards that killed even the strongest wolves. Are you certain? David asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. Certain, Alpha, Jax replied solemnly. I found a piece of fabric from her satchel snagged on a thorn bush right at the boundary line. She crossed over. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. The severing of the mate bond had left a gaping wound in his spirit, a wound he had tried to pack with anger and righteous indignation. But the thought of Luna out there, alone, freezing, perhaps already dead on those jagged rocks, stripped away the anger entirely, leaving behind only a terrifying, gaping horror. Send a retrieval team, David ordered, moving toward the door. 5 of our best men. We leave in 10 minutes. David, wait. Elena caught his arm, her carefully manicured nails digging into his sleeve. You cannot be serious. You publicly stripped her of everything. You banished her for treason. If you go running after her now, you will look weak. The pack will lose all respect for you. David looked down at her hand, then up into her calculating eyes. The logic was sound. It was the exact logic he had used to justify his actions on the dais. But logic felt like ashes in his mouth when weighed against the sudden, overwhelming realization of what he had done. He had let his pride and a sudden, inexplicable paranoia blind him. Let go of me, Elena, he said softly. The quiet menace in his tone made her snatch her hand back as if burned. As he stepped out into the hallway, another guard hurried toward him, carrying a wax-sealed envelope. Alpha, an urgent missive from the Silver River Pack. David tore it open. His eyes scanned the brief, formal script. The Silver River Alpha was expressing extreme confusion regarding the rumors of leaked secrets, stating plainly that they had received no such intelligence and requesting a summit to clear the air. The ledger was a lie. The realization hit him like a physical blow, driving him to his knees right there in the hallway. He had been manipulated, and he had sent his soulmate straight into the abyss. Warmth. It was the first thing Luna registered. A dry, radiating heat that soothed the deep ache in her bones. Slowly, she forced her eyes open. The world was a blurry collage of stone and flickering orange light. She was lying on a makeshift cot woven from thick pine branches and layered with heavy, animal hide furs. The smell of burning sage and dried mint filled the air, cutting through the damp, metallic scent of the Blackwood Ridge. She tried to sit up, but a sharp, localized pain in her ribs forced a sharp hiss from her teeth. I wouldn't advise sudden movements, a voice spoke from the shadows. You took quite a tumble down the scree slope. 3 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and severe dehydration. Luna tensed, her eyes darting toward the source of the voice. A man stepped into the warm glow of the firelight. He was older, perhaps in his late 40s, with hair the color of iron and a closely cropped beard. His face was weathered, etched with deep lines of hardship, and a prominent, jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jawline. He was dressed in rugged, practical clothing, holding a carved wooden bowl steaming with broth. "Who are you?" Luna asked, her voice cracking. She kept her tone polite but guarded, her muscles coiling in preparation to fight, despite the pain. My name is Julian, the man said, stopping a respectful distance away and setting the bowl on a flat stone near her cot. And before you ask, no, I am not affiliated with David's pack, nor any other pack that would care to drag you back for a bounty. Luna narrowed her eyes. You know who I am. It's hard not to. Julian replied, sitting on a sturdy wooden crate opposite her. The shockwave of an alpha severing a bond with his Luna in front of 300 witnesses tends to travel through the regional ether. The gossip reaches even the most isolated corners of the territory. Luna reached cautiously for the bowl, the warmth of the wood comforting against her battered hands. She took a small sip. It was a rich, savory bone broth that instantly sent a jolt of energy through her system. You live out here, on the ridge? I survive out here, Julian corrected gently. Much like you are attempting to do. I was doing fine until I tripped. She muttered defensively, taking another sip. Julian offered a soft, dry chuckle. You were being hunted by Jax, so you fled into the most hostile terrain in 100 miles, nearly died of thirst, and stumbled into a Weaver conduit. Fine is a very subjective term, Luna. Luna froze, the bowl stopping halfway to her mouth. You know about the figures in the canyon, the Weavers. Julian's demeanor shifted, the mild amusement vanishing, replaced by a grim, hard seriousness. I know entirely too much about them. They are parasites. They feed on the ambient energy of broken packs, of chaos and instability. When your bond was severed so violently, it acted like a beacon. They are drawing power from the psychic wound David inflicted upon your pack. Luna thought of the silver pool, the distorted, screaming image of David, and the heavy realization that he was unraveling without her. She hated him for what he had done, but she did not want to see him destroyed by dark magic. Why are you telling me this? Luna asked, studying Julian closely. Why take me in? Why not let the ridge claim me? Because, Julian said, leaning forward, the firelight catching a familiar, authoritative glint in his dark eyes. The Weavers don't just want your pack. They want the entire territory. And the person who handed David that forged ledger? The person who orchestrated your downfall? They are working for the Weavers. Luna's breath hitched. Elena, a willing pawn, Julian confirmed. She gets the alpha. The Weavers get the resulting chaos. He paused, letting the heavy truth settle between them. I know this, Luna, because 3 years ago, a very similar ledger appeared in my study, and my pack, the Silver River, exiled their alpha based on those lies. Luna stared at the scarred, quiet man, the pieces suddenly clicking into a horrifying picture. You were the alpha of Silver River. I was, Julian said quietly. And now, it seems, we have a mutual problem to solve. Drink your broth. We have much to discuss, and very little time before David's collapse gives them all the power they need. The wind on the Blackwood Ridge did not blow. It clawed. It tore at David's thick coat, biting through the layers of wool and leather as if they were made of paper. He marched at the head of the retrieval team, his boots sinking into loose shale and treacherous snowdrifts. Behind him, Jax and 3 of his most seasoned warriors moved in grim silence. They had been tracking for 12 hours straight, and the morale was dangerously low. David's internal state was far worse than the biting cold. The phantom ache in his chest, the void where his mate bond had once thrived, had metastasized into a burning, suffocating agony. Every step he took onto the ridge felt like stepping deeper into his own guilt. He kept seeing flashes of Luna in the shadows of the twisted pines. Luna freezing, Luna bleeding, Luna looking at him with that terrifying, hollow acceptance before she turned her back on the pack. "Alpha," Jax called out, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "The trail vanishes here. The rock is too hard, and the snow is drifting too fast. We are walking blind." David halted, wiping frost from his eyelashes. They stood at the lip of a massive, plunging canyon. The darkness below seemed unnatural, pooling like heavy black water. "We do not stop," David commanded, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Spread out. Look for broken branches, displaced stones. Anything." As his men fanned out along the canyon's edge, David leaned against a jagged boulder, closing his eyes to steady a sudden spell of vertigo. When he opened them, the shadows at the bottom of the ravine seemed to writhe. He heard a whisper, a sound like dry leaves scraping against a tombstone. "She's gone, David. You cast her into the dark, and the dark consumed her." David flinched, his hand dropping to the hilt of the hunting knife at his belt. "Who's there? You broke the compass. Now you will wander until you starve." The voices were in his head, slipping through the cracked foundations of his psychic defenses. He gripped the stone until his knuckles turned white, realizing with a horrifying clarity that the legends of the ridge were true. The environment was weaponizing his regret. Miles away, in the warmth of the hidden cave, Luna sat cross-legged on a woven rug, a stark contrast to David's torment. The sharp pain in her ribs had dulled to a manageable ache, thanks to Julian's herbal poultices. She watched the older Alpha add another log to the fire, sending a shower of golden sparks into the damp air. "The weavers feed on the friction of a broken bond," Julian explained, sitting heavily on a wooden crate. "When David humiliated you, he didn't just break a pack law. He severed a 7-year tether of concentrated energy. That energy is currently bleeding out into the atmosphere, drawing the weavers like sharks to blood." Luna stared into the flames, processing the logic. "So, as long as he and I remain at odds, the weavers grow stronger? They use his guilt and my anger to power themselves?" "Precisely," Julian nodded, his scarred face solemn. "And Elena is their anchor within your pack. She ensures the chaos continues by feeding David's paranoia and isolating him from his loyalists. By the time he realizes the ledger was a forgery, his mind will be too fractured by the Weaver's influence to lead." "He already knows," Luna murmured, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I can feel the echo of it. The anger is gone. There's only panic now." Julian tilted his head, studying her carefully. "If you can still feel the echo, the bond is not entirely dead, merely severely damaged. You have a choice, Luna. We can stay hidden here, survive the winter, and watch your former pack tear itself apart. Or I face him," Luna finished, her voice steady. "Not to rebuild the bond, but to cauterize the wound, to deny the weavers their feast by finding emotional closure." Julian offered a slow, approving smile. "You are an exceptional woman." David was a fool of historic proportions. "But how do you plan to confront him when he is currently walking directly into a weaver trap in the lower canyon?" Luna's eyes widened. She stood up, ignoring the twinge in her side. She remembered the silver pool, the chanting, the projected image of David's agony. "They aren't hunting me anymore. They are hunting him. We have to go." The descent into the lower canyon was a nightmare of shifting rock and suffocating darkness. David's men were disciplined, but even they were beginning to unravel. One of the warriors, a seasoned fighter named Thomas, had dropped to his knees 10 minutes ago, weeping over a brother who had died 5 years prior. The Weaver's illusions were picking them apart, one traumatic memory at a time. David forced himself forward, dragging Thomas by the collar of his coat. "Stay with me," he barked, though his own vision was swimming with phantoms. "Do not listen to them." Suddenly, the narrow passage opened into a wide, circular clearing. In the center, the air shimmered with an unnatural, sickly silver light. 3 robed figures stood waiting, their faces obscured by deep cowls. The temperature plummeted, freezing the breath in David's lungs. "Welcome, Alpha," the center figure hissed, the voice echoing simultaneously from the canyon walls and from inside David's own skull. "You bring such a feast of sorrow." Jack stepped in front of David, baring his teeth, a low growl rumbling in his chest. But before he could lunge, the shadows around the clearing stretched and solidified into the shape of massive, ink-black wolves. The Weaver's constructs. They outnumbered David's exhausted team 3-1. "You traded your shield for a dagger," the Weaver mocked, "and now you bleed." David drew his knife, stepping shoulder to shoulder with Jack's. He was going to die here. The realization settled over him with a heavy, cold finality. He had destroyed his own life, and now he was dragging his best men down with him. "Hold the line," he ordered, raising his blade. The shadow wolves lunged. Suddenly, a blinding flash of golden light pierced the gloom from the ridge above. A shockwave of pure, resonant energy slammed into the canyon floor, scattering the shadow wolves like smoke in a hurricane. The Weavers shrieked, a sound of grating metal. As they shielded their eyes from the sudden brilliance, David stumbled back, raising an arm to block the glare. As his eyes adjusted, he saw 2 figures standing on a rocky outcropping just above the clearing. One was a broad-shouldered man with a scarred face. The other was Luna. She did not look like the broken, exhausted woman he had banished days ago. She stood tall, bathed in the golden aura of her dormant Luna energy, her posture radiating an unshakable, terrifying calm. The Weaver's silver light flickered and dimmed under the pressure of her presence. "That is quite enough," Luna said. Her voice wasn't raised, yet it commanded the absolute attention of every living thing in the canyon. It was the voice of a ruler. She walked down the steep incline, her footing sure and graceful. Julian followed closely behind. As Luna approached the clearing, the Weavers shrank back. Their magic relied on fractured minds and broken hearts. The absolute crystalline clarity of Luna's resolve was poison to them. "You cannot mend this," the lead Weaver hissed, though its voice trembled. "The bond is shattered. The chaos is ours. I am not here to mend it," Luna replied softly, stopping 10 feet from the robed figures. "I am here to end it." She closed her eyes, drawing a deep, shuddering breath. For 7 years, she had held on to the fraying threads of her connection to David, hoping to fix what was broken. Now, with a conscious, agonizing push of her will, she released it entirely. She let go of the anger, the betrayal, and the lingering, desperate love. She accepted the finality of the end. A silent shockwave rippled through the canyon. The phantom void in David's chest suddenly slammed shut, leaving him gasping for air as the raw, bleeding edge of his psychic wound was violently sealed. Deprived of the leaking energy, the Weaver's physical forms began to dissolve. They shrieked in protest, their robes collapsing into piles of ash that were instantly swept away by the bitter wind. The canyon fell, deathly silent. David fell to his knees, his knife dropping to the stone with a clatter. He looked up at Luna. She stood before him, whole, radiant, and completely out of his reach. The realization of what she had just done saving him by severing the final, lingering echo of their souls. Broke him entirely. "Luna," he choked out, tears finally spilling over his frostbitten cheeks. "Luna, please." "Hello, David," she said politely. Her eyes held no malice, but they held no warmth either. It was the look one gave a stranger. The return to the pack boundaries was a slow, surreal march. The sun was rising, casting long golden shadows across the snow. David walked in silence, surrounded by his men, his eyes fixed on the ground. Luna and Julian walked ahead of them, speaking in quiet, measured tones. David felt like a ghost haunting his own life. As the heavy iron gates of the pack house came into view, the tension spiked. A line of guards stood blocking the entrance, led by Elena. She wore a thick fur coat, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the returning party with a mixture of disbelief and calculation. "Halt," Elena commanded as they approached. "Alpha David is compromised. He abandoned the pack in a time of crisis to chase a traitor. As your new Luna, I order him detained." The guards hesitated, their hands hovering over their weapons. Jack stepped forward, a dangerous glint in his eye, but Luna raised a hand, stopping him. She stepped to the front of the group, her gaze locking onto Elena's. "The Weavers are dead, Elena," Luna said smoothly, her voice carrying across the quiet morning air. "Your conduit to the ridge is severed. The magic you used to cloud his judgment is gone." Elena's face paled, the triumphant mask slipping to reveal a brief flash of genuine terror. "I don't know what you are talking about. You are a banished traitor." "No," a deep, authoritative voice boomed. Julian stepped out from behind Luna, throwing off the hood of his cloak. The scarred face of the former Silver River Alpha was instantly recognizable to the older guards. "She is the savior of your pack. The ledger was a forgery, Elena. The exact same forgery you and your associates planted in my study 3 years ago." A shocked murmur rippled through the guards. The pieces fell into place with devastating logic. The sudden accusations, the swift banishment, the rapid push for control. David pushed his way to the front, his eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying clarity. "Arrest her," he ordered his men, his voice cracking like a whip. "Throw her in the holding cells. We will convene a tribunal tonight." Elena screamed, thrashing as 2 guards grabbed her arms, dragging her away toward the pack house. The air instantly felt lighter, the oppressive tension lifting from the courtyard. David turned to Luna. The pack members were spilling out of the main doors, their faces etched with guilt and relief. They parted, creating a wide circle around the 2 of them. "Luna," David began, his voice trembling. He dropped to one knee on the cold gravel, lowering his head in the ultimate display of submission. The gasps from the crowd were audible. An Alpha never knelt. "I was blind. I was poisoned by paranoia and manipulated by a snake. I broke the most sacred law, and I broke you. I have no right to ask for your forgiveness." He looked up, his eyes pleading, desperate. "But I am asking you to come home. Take back your title. Take back your place. I will spend the rest of my life making this right. I swear it." Luna looked down at the man she had loved. She saw his genuine remorse, the absolute destruction of his pride. A part of her, the girl who had built this pack with him, ached to reach out and smooth the lines of worry from his face. But the woman who had survived the Blackwood Ridge remained still. "You did not break me, David," Luna said softly, though the silence was so profound everyone heard her. "But you did break us. Trust is not a mirror you can shatter and glue back together without seeing the cracks. You publicly stripped me of my dignity, my home, and my safety, without a moment of hesitation. David closed his eyes, a single tear tracking through the dirt on his face. Please, I accept your apology, Luna continued, her tone gentle but imbued with unyielding finality. And I am glad the pack is safe from the Weavers. But I cannot be your Luna. Not anymore. She stepped back, distancing herself from the kneeling Alpha. She turned to Julian, who offered a respectful, understanding nod. Julian and I are traveling to the Silver River territory, Luna announced to the stunned crowd. We have a pack to rebuild and exiled wolves to bring home. Your Alpha has learned a painful lesson today. Support him. He will need you. David watched, paralyzed by grief, as Luna adjusted the strap of her satchel. She did not look back at the sprawling mansion, the manicured gardens, or the life she had built. She had laid down a rusted crown, only to forge a new one from iron and fire on the ridge. She turned and walked away toward the rising sun. And this time, David knew. She was truly gone forever. The forest swallowed Luna's silhouette, but her absence left an indelible mark on the courtyard. David remained kneeling in the gravel, the cold morning wind finally sweeping away the lingering scent of jasmine, replacing it with the sharp, bracing reality of his own making. He had saved his pack, but lost the only woman who had truly known his soul. Luna, walking alongside Julian toward the Silver River, felt the morning sun warm her face. The path ahead was unknown, rocky, and steeped in challenge. But for the first time in her life, the path belonged entirely to her. If you enjoyed this dramatic journey of betrayal, resilience, and finding one's true strength, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing for more immersive stories.